Vice President Kaine.
Be the vice president of your fan club. And I'm sure there's a lot of competition for that role. Let me thank the witnesses for your testimony. And I also just want to compliment you on some tactical successes that you've described in the earlier testimony. The battlefield space of ISIL is shrinking, but it creates new challenges because as they feel that shrinking, they want to do other things that are more asymmetric in other cities around the world to maintain relevance. So that's going to pose all kinds of challenges for us. While I do applaud you for tactical successes, I'm going to just repeat a refrain with the announcement of the escalation of troop presence in Syria. I am deeply concerned about the legal basis for this war, both domestic and international legal basis. On the domestic side, I am in a minority in this body, in Congress, in believing that the 2001 authorization does not provide a legal justification for this war. And I think that there isn't a domestic legal justification unless and until we do an authorization for military force. General Mattis, the former head of CENTCOM, spoke last Friday at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and was harshly critical of Congress for not passing an authorization. And he said, quote, "Worth more than 10 battleships or 5 armored divisions is a sense of American political resolve." I just worry that we haven't sent that sense, and on Congress's shoulders, we haven't sent that sense. General Dunford, you testified about a year ago as Commandant of the Marine Corps for this committee, and I asked you about an authorization and what it might do. And you said, and this is almost a direct quote, "What our men and women need, and it's virtually all that they need, is a sense that what they're doing has meaning, has value, and has the support of the American public." I don't think we've given them that. I don't think we've sent a message of political resolve as the political leadership, as the decision makers contemplated in Article 1 of the Constitution. We've not sent a message of resolve to our troops. We haven't sent that message to our allies. We haven't sent that message to our adversaries. And so I continue to believe that the domestic legal authorization for this war is highly problematic. I want to turn my attention to a second legal issue, which I usually haven't talked about, and that there's got to be international legal basis for war as well. If you are fighting a war on your own soil and you're not invading anybody else's sovereignty, you don't need separate international legal justification for fighting that war. But if you're into the sovereign space of another nation, there not only has to be a domestic legal justification, there's got to be an international legal justification. Now, a common legal justification, one of the most common on the international side, is that you have been invited in by the sovereign nation that wants your help. U.S. action against ISIL in Iraq right now is at the invitation of the Iraqi government. So there is clear international legal justification for all of our activities in Iraq, setting aside the domestic question. I'm sorry to say this, but there is also international legal justification for Russian military activity in Syria because Russia has been invited in by the sovereign government of Syria. We may like it or we may not. We may think it's a bad idea, but in terms of the international legal justification for Russian activity in Syria, they've been invited in by a sovereign government. Russia, through proxies and even through their own forces, is carrying out military operations in Ukraine. That's a violation of international law. It's a clear violation of international law because Ukraine has not invited them in. They are carrying out military operations in a sovereign nation without the support of that sovereign nation, contrary to the wishes of the sovereign nation. But what I struggle with is how can we criticize the Russian incursion into Ukrainian sovereignty when we are carrying out now escalating military operations in Syria without the permission and really even against the will of the sovereign of that nation? I am correct, am I not, that Syria has not invited us to conduct military operations within the nation of Syria?
You're correct, and just to address a couple of the points that you've made, first of all, I want to hasten to say I'm no lawyer, but we do have lawyers, and with respect to the AUMF, authorization for the use of military force, I agree with you. I testified in favor of there being such an AUMF. importantly because it would signify to the troops that the country's behind them. Now, I think they feel like they're behind them, and the chairman and I try to attest to that. Your visits to the region attest to that, so I think they feel that, but that would have been another way of attesting to that. I am told by the lawyers, and I believe this, that the legal basis for what we're doing exists in both domestic law and international law for everything we're doing. But again, I'm not the expert on that, and couldn't explain to you the ins and outs of it. I also will say that if there's a difference between what we're doing in Syria and what the Russians did in Ukraine, and we're trying to fight real terrorists. We're not trying to destabilize a stable situation. So we're trying to return order and decency, not the other way around. So I don't know what a lawyer would say, but as a common sense answer is there's a big difference.
Of course there is. And I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. But if I had Russian witnesses on the stand, they would talk about why they're doing what they're doing in the Ukraine. I mean, and I'll just conclude with this, Mr. Chair. At the end of this administration, as a strong friend and supporter of this president, and as a strong friend of everybody around this table, I think we've made a complete hash of the, and that's a diplomatic phrase, of the doctrines of war, both domestic and international. We are engaged in an incursion into the sovereign nation of Syria without their permission, against their will. We're trying to criticize Russia for engaging into an incursion into another nation against their will. And we're asserting as the difference that we're doing something good and they're doing something bad. I agree that we're doing something good. I agree that they're doing something bad. But that's not a limiting principle, because everybody's going to say what they're doing is good. And so at the end of this administration, with the complicity of this Congress, I think we've basically come up with a war doctrine that says wherever and whenever, as long as the president feels that it's a good idea, without Congress even needing to do anything about it. The problem is, if that is the rule, and I think that's become the rule, that's a rule that I think will haunt us domestically under future presidents and Congresses that I could see. And I also think it's a rule that can easily be seized by any other nation to basically justify all kinds of things that are horrible. And so we're only 6 months before the end of the administration, an administration that promised 3 years ago, March of 2013, that they would try to work with Congress to revise the 2001 authorization that is currently being used as a justification for actions not only in Iraq and Syria, but Yemen and Africa and these Arabian Peninsula. There has been virtually no work done to put any limiting principle on that, certainly not in any kind of a negotiation with Congress that I'm aware of. And so we're going to basically be in a position where we've turned a 60-word authorization from 2001 with a lot of administrative gloss that wasn't even in the authorization into an all-purpose wherever, whenever domestic justification. And then we've taken common international principles of law, and basically we've decided that if our motives are okay, we can incur into the sovereignty of another nation because we're doing the right thing. But then that takes away our ability to effectively criticize other nations that get into the sovereignty of other nations, as Russia is doing in the Ukraine. So, Mr. Chair, this is not a subject that we're going to resolve today, but I just, as we reach these new milestones of escalation, I'm just going to keep putting on the record a deep concern about the precedent that we're setting for this nation, but also the example that we're setting for other nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Kaine. On behalf of Chairman